Hi, my name's Megan, and you're listening to Career Congregation, a weekly conversation around all things career. Every week, I interview people who have done or are doing amazing and inspirational things in their career. I like to feature real people and their stories and struggles, the decisions they made, the rock bottom moments, and the experiences and inner shifts they had that shaped their careers. If these conversations resonate with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone. You never know who you might inspire. If you think you know someone who might be a good guest on the show, please also send them my way. And if you'd like to support any of this work more directly, there's a coffee link in my bio where you can buy me a coffee. Every little bit helps support to keep these conversations going. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation. Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Career Congregation. I am very excited today to be joined by an old colleague of mine and someone I've known since got to be around 2018, 2019 BC, before COVID was probably the last time I saw Daniel Allen-Hörnfeldt. Dan, and I used to work together at Fuller's, which I know I touched on my time at Fuller's a lot in the first season, but I haven't really talked about it in a while. I think Dan and I both have made very big changes in our careers, and we're both living very differently. Neither one of us is even in the UK anymore. And Dan moved to Sweden after leaving the UK. It was around 2019, right? Yeah?
Brexit.
Yeah. Yeah. And now works in a completely different line of work. So we both have left the hospitality pub, fun London lifestyle, hustle bustle. And I would say both of us have really embraced more healthy things. And I'm in the process of doing more reconnecting with nature. And Dan is all about that. That is everything he does now. He's an ambassador for Rewilding Sweden. And his journey from what used to be the pub world in London to where he is now is just an incredible story. And I know so many of you will find it really inspiring. I have loved watching all of his choices and him just really follow what is authentically right for him over the last few years. So, welcome, Dan, and I'm really excited to speak with you today.
What an introduction. Wow. It's always strange when somebody else tells the story.
Yeah, it is. But it's good. It's good. Did any of that ring, did that feel accurate and true for you hearing?
Yeah, as much of that fires off ideas and thoughts. I've had a new name since we worked together. That was one of the things I thought about
Yeah,
in your
I
introduction.
clocked that when we were doing our emails back and forth. I noted that with your surname. I was like, "Oh yeah. Wonderful."
Hmm.
Um, do you want to give the listeners a little bit of background about your early years? So, like your cultural background, ethnicity, upbringing, like what your sort of formative years were like that shaped you in your early days and like early career choices.
Where do I begin? My parents met at university. They both were chemists.
In the
And then my
UK?
dad went on. Yeah, they met in the UK, at Leeds
Yep.
University. Then my dad did a PhD in chemistry and then went on to work with Procter and Gamble. And then that took him to Germany, where my brother and sister were born. And my mum, from that point onwards, kind of worked part time, but still in chemistry. And then and then they went to Spain. And then just before I came, they moved back to the UK. Um, and there's this story about how my name was I was actually given a German name when I was born. But then, because this young lad had been born in the UK, all of their friends revolted and said he should have an English name. So they changed my name from Christian with a K.
Okay.
But they had just sort of landed back in the UK, and I was born in Newcastle, where we lived for a short period, and then moved down south, again, following my dad's job. And I grew up in this place called St Albans, which is about, it's a commuter town outside London, half an hour on the train. I found out yesterday or recently that there's this chalk stream running through St Albans that I never realised. And chalk streams are these wonderful sort of ecosystems of life. And there's only 260 of them in the whole world. And I think 95% are in the UK. And I lived there until I was 18 and never knew that there was this wonderful sort of life force weaving its way through the city. But yeah, St Albans is a historic place, and yeah, perfectly nice place to grow up, safe. I was able to take the bus to school by myself from a relatively young age, 12, 13 maybe, which I think was probably important. And then yeah, had no real problems growing up. I don't think I was the youngest. I guess I probably always sort of had this youngest child syndrome, I suppose, where I was looking up to the rest, trying to emulate what the rest had done. And there was probably something in my dad. He went on. At some point he decided that chemistry wasn't enough for him, and so he moved into management consulting and then set up his own business, which he then later sold to WPP. And my aunt and uncle, they never had kids, but they also were chemists, and also had these sort of high-flying careers. My uncle was, I think, head of marketing for Pepsi in Europe, and my aunt did something like was the MD of McVitie's or something big. And at some point, I think, I don't know if I'm just sort of casting back an opinion or whether it's actually the case, but at some point I started to become sort of overtaken by the challenge and started to kind of put less effort into school, because I wonder whether it was too big a challenge to try and emulate them.
Yeah.
But school sort of became less and less of something that interested me, and I kind of became more and more, I guess, rebellious to the idea of school. And then when I left, it wasn't really an option for me to do anything else. It was pre-gap years and things, and I was told I was to go to university, and I was told I was to go to university to do a degree that had a sandwich as part of it, so that I would get some work experience before I then came out. And like it was chosen for me what I would do. I was good at maths, so I did this degree that was sort of a mathematical look at business, and chose Loughborough because I was good at sport, or Loughborough was chosen for me. And then I spent my first year drinking, and I didn't really try. I didn't try hard, and I think it's like reflecting back on it. I think it would be easier to not try than try, because if I tried and failed, that would be difficult. That would have been difficult.
Yeah.
And but then I can't remember what exactly happened. But like this, I had always felt growing up. I was the guy in school who was the best at all the sports, and that kind of I felt that was something that was imposed upon me. Like the whole family is very sporty. But then after this year of drinking, somehow I then chose to do it on my own accord, and I had a different relationship was born. And so I started doing triathlon in the sort of early days of triathlon before it became Olympic sport, and rose pretty quickly because I'd had this sort of childhood of being quite a high-level runner and swimmer. And at the same time, my sister, she became a pro triathlete, and so I started to think this might be where I'd go. But all the way through childhood up to that point, I kind of saw myself as being the dude on the train with the sort of top hat and trench coat and briefcase going to the bank, because I guess that was the sort of image that I had of that was what the school sort of suggested that we might end up doing. It was this private boys' school, paid for school that I had a bursary for. And so it was, I guess we were sort of groomed into a certain expectation of what we would become.
Yeah, I
And
had that as well.
that on top of the sort of way that my, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I really
Yeah, I'm keen to
relate
hear more
to
about
that.
that.
Yeah.
That on top of, I guess, the sort of lifestyles that my family lived, very much sort of groomed a certain way of thinking. And like, I guess all families have got their certain constellations. But if I sort of reflect back for what then happened over the next 20 years, I was very much, it very much feels like I was, whilst my childhood was great in many aspects, I then spent the sort of next 20 years trying to find myself underneath all of this that I felt had been put on top of me, these ways of life that isn't anybody's fault necessarily, it's just the sort of way it is. Chester and I, we've just had a baby, he's 9 months old, and we often talk about how we want him to be whoever he is. Yet I take him swimming 5 times a week because water is something that's really important for me. So like, I really understand why my parents acted the way that they did. I don't resent them for it at all. Anyway, so when I came out of university, take a step back from that. In my 3rd year of university, I then did this, I took this job at ExxonMobil as part of my degree. And like in the first 2 weeks, I just couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why everyone was the way they were to each other. Why would one person stand by the water cooler with me and say one thing, and then I'd hear them say something else to somebody else? And like with this office politics, I couldn't comprehend it. There was like, I felt this extreme discomfort for it. And I spent my whole year hating this. And like things started to fall apart because this is what I was going to be. I was going to be this guy in the tube going at the bank. And so when I got back to my final year, everything started to change. I found a different crowd of people. I started sort of dabbling in recreational drugs and drinking and finding the finer things of life and listening to different types of music. And so when I came out and everyone was taking these graduate jobs, I just couldn't think of anything worse. So we started off, a friend of mine had set up a BMX business. And so I went and worked with him on that. And that grew pretty quickly, pretty soon, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't something I felt passionate about. And I got into this sort of crowd in Manchester where we were partying all the time. And anyway, I ended up going to Perth in Australia for 3 weeks and ended up staying for 3 years. And so kind of it went for the next 10 years. I went between place to place, moving around, trying to figure out what it was, like where this point was, where my skills and interests aligned. And I tried everything. And I guess if I backcast what I know now, I now see it as this sort of range that I got of all these different types of things. Like I worked washing cars, I worked running the retailing for a rugby franchise. Everything. I set up a flip-flop business for a while. I started riding motorbikes across Australia to deliver them. A bunch of stuff. Like I just followed. I was desperate to find this. Worked in a bank. Desperate to find a point where my skills and interests aligned. And then eventually my visa ran out for various reasons, and I figured out that I could come back and do a master's. If I did a master's, then I would get enough points to go back and get immigration or to get permanent residency for Australia.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, what should I do? And so I was interested in politics, and I had got quite heavily into sort of reading about cultures. Cultures really interested me, and I got into the sort of gonzo beat movement, and it was something that I thought I could pursue with this politics degree. And I found out that I could politics masters. I found out that if I went back to my old university, then they would give me a bursary for something like 75%. So within the case of about 3 weeks, I went from living in Perth to living in Loughborough, going back to university. Italy, where I spent pretty much my entire time reading about sort of histories of things. So I really got into the history of writing, and I really got into the history of music, and fell into a different type of crowd, a music crowd, but this job then I got in PR, whilst I thought it was wonderful because I could work with the media and politics and like combine what these things I thought was interesting for me. But like there was this thing about the fact that I felt like I was just bullshitting people every day, because this idea was about trying to spin stories into the newspapers. And I was drinking a lot and partying a lot and smoking a lot. And at some point I got drunk at the Australian embassy and got sacked for like, I don't know, I was saying something I shouldn't say to a journalist from The Sun or something, I can't remember. But anyway, after I got sacked, I remember taking a picture of myself in the mirror of the tube, and I just looked like death. I looked like a ghost. Anyway, I went on a 7-day binge, and on the sort of 5th or 6th day, took a flight to the Canary Islands, and I stayed there for about 6 months, where I was trying to be a writer. I was this sort of drinking, smoking guy with a hat, thinking I could be a writer. But downstairs from where I lived, this guy had a bar, and I'm sitting there on the balcony, sort of reading Dostoevsky, thinking I was this character. And downstairs, this guy was stressing out because he couldn't get anyone to work in his bar. So he's like, "Please come and help me." So I went down and started helping him, and I had these like slidey shoes, and this is a story I tell a lot. I could like slide down the bar and like put a drink on the bar, and like immediately put this smile on their face. And I don't know, something caught my attention. And so shortly after I went back to the UK and took a job essentially as a pub trainee, or like a landlord trainee. Mm-hmm. And so began my life in hospitality.
Yeah.
And I guess because of this range that I'd had, because I'd done all these different things, I sort of progressed fast. And so I spent a year as a trainee, and then I've always been interested in food. And so I went from pubs to fine dining, and worked my way from like polishing glasses and cutlery to being a general manager of a restaurant, a Michelin standard restaurant. And then from there, I was there for 3 years or so in this fine dining French restaurant, where we would like line up the tablecloths with rulers and like iron the tablecloths, and it was a really wonderful experience. I decided I wanted volume after that, or I wanted to progress, and so I took a job at this sort of gastropub on the corner of Shoreditch, which was this immense place with a fine dining restaurant upstairs. Anyway, I went from there quite quickly. I got promoted into this multi-site role, and we had 3 sites, and then it quickly we opened a 4th and then a 5th, and then I had this real sort of sense of wanting to move, like progress up. Like I was really hungry for something, whether it was sort of power or money, or I'm not really quite sure what it was, but my sort of, I guess the mentors I had around that time very much like full of ego and power. And when I think about like brigades, like words like brigades that they use to call the teams in the kitchen, and I even saw someone recently on LinkedIn talk about their pub as being this battalion. I don't know, it was this sort of land of control, and like I really started to feel along these years like there was something inside of me that I was trying to squash with the booze. And of course, like everybody in London, the recreational drugs were a part of my life. But it was as if I would come home at 12 o'clock and have to spend a couple of hours drinking, just to sort of, like, I don't know, squash my feelings. And I very much, like, if I look back at some of my journals in the time, it was very much about, like, trying to suppress these sort of demons inside. Anyway, I moved from running the 5 restaurants to then wanting more, and so then I got headhunted into this job at Fuller's, where eventually I had oversight over 20 pubs and pubs, and it was this bizarre experience where I'd gone from this sort of really leading edge world where the general managers who I worked with were all young and like feisty, to this group of pubs that were all the oldest pubs in the network, oldest pub that Fuller's had in central London. and a group of managers who were all older than me and who had all been doing the job for a long time, and quite a lot of them had been in their pub for a long time. And for them, I'd come from this world where service, it was all about service, and doing things to make people have the best possible experience, whether it was the customer or the team. Like, this people thing had been really strong for me. And why I got recruited into that role, because they wanted to sort of reposition it to being about people.
Yeah, I remember that.
I couldn't really understand. Yeah, I couldn't really understand why they were behaving the way that they were behaving. But this was like a real strong sort of transition point for me, because I remember in my first couple of weeks where I'd call one of the managers up, and they'd answer the phone and say, "Yeah, what do you want?" And I'd be like, "Excuse me?" And I'd feel myself really reacting to it. And for the first sort of time, I was able to sort of look at those reactions, and rather than like reacting back at these people, like, what is it that makes them? Why is he being like that with me? And I kind of got to the point with him and various other ones that my predecessor had only ever called them when he wanted something. So of course they answered the phone like that.
Yeah.
But this sort of transition in Fuller's was horrific.
It's something. Okay.
I like the challenge of sitting completely still.
I'm not good at it either, so yeah.
You should include that in the podcast. It's relevant, I think. Like, being able to sit still, I think, is important.
Well, I think that's
Anyway,
something that you and I both probably have. There's so many similarities in what you're saying with what my own journey. But yeah, so your transition into Fuller's was horrific.
Horrific, and
Yeah.
like the company, a lot of these older managers, the company didn't like the way that they were sort of only focused on profit maximization, and there was no real consideration, because a lot of these pubs were tourist-based pubs, and the perspective was that there's always going to be another tourist behind this tourist, so we don't really need to think about too much. But then also, like, there was this perspective that people want to come and work in these places, and quite often there are young foreign workers that came and worked, and so there was no real focus on either quality of experience for the people who work there, or for the people who were coming through the doors. And so we, I think 11 of them went in the first 3 months, or 11 of them got moved on in the first 3 months, and of course that causes backlash. And so people started to sort of fight in like scurrilous ways against me, and it got to the point where I was drinking probably more than I should, and I went on holiday to Ireland for St. Patrick's Day, and we were clearing up the Airbnb, and there was like 20 wine bottles from 3 days, me and my partner at the time. And something about that, like packing up, I can still remember packing up those bin bags of wine bottles, just like, this isn't right. And the only clothes I could wear at the time was this rugby jumper, because I'd become so big. I'd swelled up to about 115 kilos or something.
Wow.
Over the years from going from general manager to multi-site, I guess, moving from running around, doing a job running around, to sitting down. And I was just desperately unhappy. I was hating the job. My relationship wasn't good. The food I ate was bad. I remember I kept a food log. I still got it. And it was just horrific, the things that I put inside myself. Anyway, I got back from that trip and went swimming. And
Yeah.
everything
And
else just
I
happened.
remember this. I remember when you started talking a lot about the swimming, and because did you do wild swimming in the UK before you left as well?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I remember that time.
I went swimming at Virgin in Moorgate, and because I'd obviously been a swimmer when I was a kid, it came back pretty quickly for me, and so like I swim once or twice a week became 3 or 4 times a week, and then I'd seen somewhere that there was this swim in Henley that you could, this dawn swim up the river, so I entered that. I was like, and I remember coming out of that race, I guess it was, and I was like, wow, I could swim in rivers. There was just something so
Oh.
liberating about it. I don't know, something came alive. And then I got a magazine, this outdoor swimmer magazine, and the bottom of the outdoor swimmer magazine, there was a little box, like Club of the Week, I think it said. and there was this group of swimmers in Eastbourne who said they were looking for swimmers. I thought that could be me, and so I got in the car on a Saturday morning without thinking about it. We lived in the centre of London and drove to Eastbourne 2 hours, and that's this like howling gale and rough seas and red flags, and I saw this group of people
Eastbourne's
in hoodies.
hardcore because I've done the hike, the like Seven Sisters hike quite a few times, and you either start or you finish in Eastbourne, and it is like I would not get in the sea there, even on a gorgeous day. So props to you.
And I sort of scuttled over and I said, "You're not going out, you must be the swimmers." And they were like excitedly, "Yeah, it's us.
Wow.
You're not going to go out in that." And they were like proudly, "No, we swim every day. But can you swim?" And all of a sudden, like the dynamic that shifted, and they became worried about me. It's like this dude who just turned up from London because it's a rough sea and a red flag, and all of a sudden they're going to become responsible if they. But I kind of managed to persuade them that I was a competent swimmer, and so it began this thing with swimming outdoors.
How was that first experience? Did you keep up with them, or was it hard?
It wasn't for them. It's not. It wasn't a sort of. It wasn't for them about being the fastest ever. That group was never about like performance. It was about just this experience of being in the water together. And some people would swim longer and faster than others, and it didn't make any difference. And this was a part of the thing that really stood out for me, because we'd hang out and have coffee or whatever and cake afterwards. And I think for the first time I was in a group of people, in this really diverse group of people. I remember there was a vicar, and there was like an undertaker, and then there were school teachers and nurses and this dude from London. Like a group of people who weren't trying to achieve anything with each other. Like it was just a
Like
group of people hanging out.
an all-inclusive community.
It was really special.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was still full of power and ego, and so I had to become the best, of course. And so I started entering more and more races and training more and more. And just reflecting back, because I had my boss during my time at Fuller's was a real integral part to this story, because as I said, I'd come from having mentors and bosses who were very much like alpha males. And this was someone very different to that. And so she would say things to me like, "Dan, show your vulnerabilities to your team." And things like, "Dan, I can't see," like she could see swimming, like she saw this change happening. And she would look at my calendar and say, "Dan, when do you swim?" I was like, "Yeah, I sneak it in between that meeting and that meeting." She's like, "Put it in your calendar, like so everyone knows that you're swimming at that point." And she was like, "Friday afternoons, what do you do?" I was like, "Well, I have meetings." She's like, "Why don't you take Friday afternoons to just reflect?" And like all of this, like real positive coaching that she gave me was something I'd never really experienced someone who like encouraged the human in me. It was all previous to that. You will work as much as you can possibly work. And I had gone through these battles over years from when I was general manager. The last job I had as general manager, I would work 80 hours a week, and like other people would, and think nothing of it. And like other restaurateurs would come and sit at my bar, and I would scoff at them, like, "Look at them having a break. I don't need breaks. I'm the man." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like over the years, I've managed to sort of steadily recognize or understand that the less I worked, the better I became. And she really helped reinforce that, I think. Anyway, swimming became a bigger and bigger thing, and I went to Thailand to do a race, and then qualified for the World Championships of long distance swimming.
Wow.
And then went to the World Championships of long distance swimming. And then I started thinking about swimming the Channel, and so I went and started doing all these cold races. And at some point within there, like everything had changed. So I had really started telling the story to my team and like opening up for the first time. And prior to that, my sort of style of management was like through fear. It was very much about like, how can I make you feel a certain way so I can impose myself upon you? And in fact, like my previous mentors had tried to sort of coach me to get people to quit as quick as possible.
Why?
Like that was because getting someone to quit is easier than sacking them. And so like I lived in this world in London where
It's very difficult to sack people, especially in the UK. Yeah.
So like it was all these sort of transitions going on, and I started to eat differently and think about things that I was putting in my body. And I guess a big catalyst to all of this change, as my dad had died at some point I think he died on the day that I got my job at Fuller's, and he died of cancer. And a couple of years before that, I'd stopped smoking. I had this sort of 40 a day, 10-year smoking habit, and that one of his friends came up to me at the funeral and like cupped my stomach. I was like, "Oh, you should do something about that." And so this was sort of lingering in the back of my mind. And all this change happened. I changed my relationships. I moved into a different flat, and then at some point, Kerstin came into my world, and yeah, I get emotional when I think about it.
I know.
It was quite clear from the beginning that it was like this was going to be something, and she said to me from the off, I've been thinking about going back to Sweden. What do you think about that? And like, I knew nothing about Sweden, only the cliches. I couldn't tell you the difference between Helsinki, Gothenburg, Stockholm, Oslo. It was all like this magical place up in the north. And so we took a couple of trips to the south of Sweden. It was nice enough, different. It was intriguing. I was curious. But then we took a trip to visit her dad up here in the north, and we were kind of up, not far north, but relatively far north, near the Arctic Circle here. And but in the summer we have 24-hour sunlight, and we came up for a week of this 24-hour sunlight, and like because of the way it is, sheltered by the Norwegian mountains, it actually rises to a strangely high temperature in the summer, even though it's so far north. It's like a long way north of Scotland, 64 degrees north. We have these weeks of really nice weather, and we had this wonderful week of weather. And at the time, I'd been training to do the channel, and I'd spent all of my time in this lake, this like silky, wonderful lake, and like a lot of her friends had all moved away from her village, and her village is just about 30 minutes outside of the city, a village of a couple hundred people. They had all started moving back because they wanted their kids to have the same childhood that they had had, this sort of very rural childhood. And Kerstin's childhood is typified by this picture we have of her. She's riding a horse when she's about 8 years old, bareback, in her like just her undies, hanging on to the like mane of this horse, swimming in the lake. So there's this like, I don't know, it sort of typifies this lifestyle. Anyway, I heard all these stories that her friends were saying about there was a network of trails that community got together to build, and then there was an ice track on the lake, which is like incomprehensible because ice to me is the sort of thin stuff you get on ponds in the UK. But this ice on the lake thickens to a meter thick, and you can drive trucks on it. And so there was a group of people that made this ice track, and that all these sort of community initiatives that people were doing just for the hell of it. And I don't know, there was something about it that reminded me of much of what I'd read of sort of late 60s, early 70s. And we came back from that trip and had decided, this is where we want to live. And so we quit our jobs, worked our notice, and moved to Sweden. And that was 6 or 7 years ago now.
That was that was the end of 2018, right? I think.
So we had moved. One of the reasons we'd gone to visit her dad, or like we were exploring moving to Sweden sooner rather than later, because Brexit was coming, and if I was going to get a permanent visa, I needed to move before Brexit. So it was October 2019.
October, okay, yeah. I remember you're leaving drinks and that it was dark. Like it was really dark, and it was definitely like bad weather, like winter coming kind of vibes. But it was before COVID.
Pre-COVID. So yeah, we arrived in November, and it was dark. So when we moved here, we had this idea. Kerstin is a wizard with flavors. Like if you went, I don't know if you went to her house in Streatham, but in the corner of her kitchen was this like forest of like magical things, pots of ferments and pickles and dehydrates. And
I knew that she made all that, but I didn't get to go and see it. But she had dinner at our flat a few times, my housemate and I, and she would always bring like the best stuff, and it was always homemade. Yeah,
it was really special, and it is really special what she can do. And I had gone through this transition where, because I'd smoked for 10 years, and my dad had died of cancer, I'd started reading certain things. Reading's always been a big part of my life, and I read books like The China Study, and I was China Study is where they essentially proved that vegetables can reverse some of the carcinogenic impacts of meat consumption, or like things like smoking. And so I started to reduce my meat consumption, and I found it really difficult to do it, particularly eating out, because I had this sort of lifestyle in London where I was eating out most of the time, and definitely not cook for myself. And I thought I was going to have to like completely change the way I ate, you know what I mean? And when I met Shestin, because she's been vegetarian since she was 11, she essentially showed me that you can eat exactly the same ways and replace all the things that you might use with animal fat for vegetable alternatives. And I guess I'd seen something special in what she was able to do that I'd not seen in restaurants in London. Like this way of making vegetarian and vegan food that was like really tasty. So we had this idea that we would open a restaurant when we moved to the north, but thought we would take jobs first. And when we moved here, I applied to maybe 50 different restaurants and like didn't even get a response. And so that sort of escalated our push to open a restaurant. And we looked at a bunch of places in the city centre and couldn't find anything that was worth it. That was sort of, that seemed affordable and that would work. And then we saw this place out in the countryside that had the ice track next to it. And all they had was like this old kitchen with a dishwasher and a pizza oven. And we're like, a pizza? Like Shestin's thing was sourdough. And pizza's always been something I've loved. I was like, maybe we could do some pizza in this place for whilst the ice track was open, just as a way of sort of testing our learning business, because we both only ever worked for people, like learning Sweden, learning business in Sweden, like testing us working together. And so we quite quickly signed a 4-month agreement for these buildings, recruited a team, used my PR background to get that great coverage and opened this thing. But I guess what I should say is that quite often in Sweden, and the same in the UK, like quality and people focus is not the focus of countryside businesses or restaurants in particular. They're quite often underinvested and poorly run by people that don't really have any experience. And we took this sort of, I had 15 years in restaurants and Shestin had worked for Fuller's for 19 years. We took this experience and opened this place that we called Winter Cafe, this pop-up, and it just exploded. And, we went from, I think we thought we'd do like maybe 50 pizzas, and the first weekend we were doing maybe 100 a day, and then it was 200, and then 300, and then it just kept on going. And so we rebranded, or we thought we extended our contract for a year and then later for 10 years and rebranded as Root, as we called it. And yeah, it just we got so much press attention nationally in Sweden, and people were driving from the south to come and visit us, and it became such a big thing that it became unmanageable. And whatever we did to try and slow things down, like increase the prices or reduce the opening hours or make it harder to book, it only increased demand somehow. It's bonkers. And I guess because creativity is, creative expression is really important for both of us. And because we had no money, really, and because of COVID, people wanted to be outside, all this sort of wonderful stuff happened. COVID came, and so and at the same time we had this massive dump of snow, and so we built these snow pods, for example, in the snow, and put little QR codes up so you could just turn up, light a fire, scan a QR code that was stuck onto the side of the snow, and a pizza would come out to you.
Wow, that's
so
so
of
cool.
course you can imagine everyone in the city is talking about this place that is full of colour, and where the 15-year-olds are made to feel as important as 15-year-old should be made to feel. And yeah, it was massive. And I think we invested £10,000 and turned over $1 million from that.
Wow.
But at the same time as this, we had been trying to start a family, and I think when we moved to Sweden, Shestin was pregnant, in fact, and we started having a bunch of miscarriages. And when we were speaking to the doctors, and they started doing a bunch of tests, and essentially said, "You guys are fine, but you're stressed. And we got to a point after 3 years where we'd put some plans together to upgrade the facilities, because all we had was this pizza oven and dishwasher and like thousands of people coming at us every day. Like it was the energy we had to put into it was so
A lot, yeah.
unsustainable.
Yeah.
So we needed to invest in the premises just to get to the point where it'd be sustainable and like, start to think about what we might, because we really wanted to keep this like energy that we created and this feeling that people had. And whenever we did lots of customer feedback surveys, and people like never really, people of course liked pizzas, but it was about this feeling that people got when they were there that really sort of stood out for us. And so, but before we signed on the line to do this big investment to the infrastructure, we decided to close for 3 months, and we would take a couple of months holiday and then come back and like do the pre-work for the building works, the renovations. We went to Vietnam for 7 weeks and didn't speak about work, not once. But not because we planned it, we just didn't. And like found each other again, and it's just wonderful experience. And when we came back on the first day back at work, I was visibly agitated, and Sheshti was like, let's take a walk, and we went for a walk and came back and wrote a list of the things we wanted from life and what we would get out of this, and it was very clear, and so we quit. And
Wow.
and yeah, and we went through IVF, and now we've got this wonderful magical creature who's 9 months old. But yeah, it was. And I guess like during all of this, I had been like continuing this transition from this like beast in London going around like lobbing metaphorical grenades at people, like living in this bubble of fear and ego, to starting to get to the point where I guess instead of squashing my feelings and emotions with booze and drugs, as I did in London quite a lot, I then started to squash them with better things, so like things like meditation and yoga and wellness, but still trying to squash them. It might have been a nicer way of doing it, but I was still trying to. And at some point, something shifted, and I started to be able to. I did a Vipassana, this 10-day Vipassana.
Yeah.
And did a bunch of psychedelics, and I don't know, something shifted where I started to be able to sort of look at these feelings and triggers and emotions like objectively and learn from them.
When you finally got to a place where you were comfortable enough with yourself and not needing to numb and sit with the uncomfortable feelings, is there one that was really dominant, or like do you feel comfortable touching on what any of those were?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete change. Like,
yeah.
A good example is that if you're sitting in a meeting, quite often before I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, like waiting to like get my point across, that that I'm tied to an opinion, and that opinion is fact in my mind. So but there's a shift towards curiosity. There's a sort of shift towards a sort of questioning of the facts, or a questioning around the certainty that we have for things, or the cliched way of saying it is this, or the way that I sort of refer to it is, if I'm running for that bus that I think I need to catch, like what's to say that catching the bus is better or not than not catching the bus? Like, and I think that can be expanded out to quite a lot of things in life. And so a comfort rises in being able to sort of just look at that thing, whether it be like a pain in your knee or a pain in your head, or the reaction that you just had to something. Not necessarily trying to find a reason for it. For long times I was like constantly like, why is this? Why am I feeling like this? Why? And like you sort of, I guess the why gently starts to fade. And like all the cognition that goes with that starts to sort of drop. And all of a sudden, rather than sort of, I guess there's this thing around expectations. Like when we're in these sort of patterns of behaviors, we are expecting the world to be a certain way. But if we can start to sort of change and think differently, act differently, then like that prediction engine stops. There's this example, there's a book called Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. He's this like professor of mushrooms. And he talks about there was this magic show in New York, and people would come out of the magic show, and a friend of his was the guy doing the magic. And they would say to the magician, whenever they came out of the show, it was like the sky was bluer somehow, or like this building was more glistening, or the tree was green. Like, what had they done? Was it some sort of hypnosis, or was it what had they done to make? Was the trickery continuing after the show? And they were like, no, there's no trickery, but these sort of magic tricks have snapped you out of your predictions. They've sort of snapped you away from what you expect to happen. So you stop and look at the sky for what the sky is, rather than your expectation of what the sky might be. And this has been the sort of most traumatic thing for me, because, for example, this autumn that's just gone, I kept going around to people saying, like, is it me, or the leaves like more orange than usual?
I was so, this
like, the leaves,
particular year, I've never been so obsessed with the leaves changing. It's like noticing a whole new world, right? Like
yes,
you've been in it the whole, it's what you said about St. Albans, that you had no idea that you were growing up in this like wonderful place with this chalk river that has all these its own life form, and you were totally
yeah.
oblivious to it until recently.
It was like before I moved, like left London, I didn't realise there were seasons. Like I'm sure there would have been leaves that I'd walked past, but like the more that you sort of, for me, like the more I was able to snap out of this rumination or fantasization about the future, or dwelling on the past, or like trying to impose myself upon the sort of reality, or trying to extract value from life. Constantly trying to extract value from life. Like the more I then was able to just sort of look and study, and like the more you look at something, the more you see, and like especially with the natural world, like the more you delve into things, just the more fantastical it all becomes. It's just unbelievably fantastical how everything is connected, and as you say, it manifests with. All of a sudden you think that the leaves have never been as orange as they have been, and I think it's just because you're looking at it more, you're actually noticing it more, rather than it just being what your mind is predicting them to be. Anyway, after Root, I spent a couple of months doing nothing, like trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I kind of felt like this journey in hospitality, this wonderful 15 years I'd had in hospitality, had sort of come to an end. I'd started at the bottom and worked having our own business, and I kind of was trying to find a place where I could apply the same principles. And I guess the point where my skills and interests aligned was about, I guess, serving people. I like creating experiences for people, customer centricity, I guess. And so I looked at the travel industry, and so I spent a year and a bit running a travel business. And this travel business was taking people to Iceland. And so I'd go to Iceland, and I'd go to... Have you been to Iceland?
No, only the airport, and I wished I had a longer layover to leave, because even descending into Reykjavik is like, it's like nowhere else I've ever seen from the air. It's like another planet. It looks incredible.
Oh, it's a wonderful place.
Yeah.
It's easy to sort of see why they've got so much like mythology in Iceland, because it is like the mountains speaking. Anyway, we'd go to these wonderful waterfalls, and there'd be like 30 buses of people getting off at these waterfalls, and like 100 cars, and there's just something not right about it. Like the way that we were sort of the way that this industry was treating the places where these people were coming to. And so I started to I really got into, what did I get into? I really started to sort of go down a rabbit hole of trying to understand this sort of natural world that I was in, because we are very much in the middle of nature up here. Like, there's less concrete. And so you start to wonder, like, well, how is that tree there? And like, what is it about these roots and the sort of mycelium that's connecting them up? And I started to then... I do some sort of amateur biology studies and start to see that there is this like network of conservation entities and people who are working towards like reconnecting people to nature, or like actually doing something to sort of help nature thrive. And I remember one day I was in this coffee shop, and this guy came past me in a jacket, and on the back of the jacket it said, "Making Europe a wilder place." I was like, what? And so this is something I want to be doing. And so I looked into it, and it was this Rewilding Europe, it was called.
Yeah.
So I started looking, and I became intrigued and read a bit about it, but I thought there's no way that these people would give me a job. What do I have to offer them? And so I didn't really think much more of it. But I had, at some point with the Iceland gig, I started to get really sick, and I had a panic attack at some point. And I remember waking up the next day after that panic attack, and just sort of laughing to myself, this idea that work or this job, my attachment to this job, and because of I really felt because I was earning a good amount of money again, and I had this prestigious position, I'd really become attached to the identity of this job and like what people perceived of me because of this job title that I had. I could go around in Iceland and like present myself in a certain way, and like all of that just sort of crashed. And like I remember waking up just giggling to myself that this is what it's become. And so I went on sick leave for a while, and there's great sick leave available in Sweden, and that's something that I never would have considered before because sickness is a weakness. And I remember in London, for example, my boss coming up to me one day and saying, "Dan, you're the sickest person I've ever seen at work." And I saw that as a badge of honour, that this is pre-COVID, obviously. Anyway, that summer, I was, what can I do now? I've tried this travel industry, that didn't work, what can I do next? And so but I needed to earn money because we were saving to buy a house. And we still had all the equipment from the restaurant, from Root, particularly the coffee equipment. I started speaking to a friend of mine who had this sort of boat premises that had a sort of empty space on the jetty next to it. He said, "Why don't you open a little coffee pop-up next to the river?" And so within the space of about 3 weeks, we just scrambled together a bunch of stuff and like painted this old shack that he had into this coffee pop-up and just opened it without any real fanfare. And so kind of began this summer of like being by the river. And I've always felt this really strong sense of something around water. And
Yeah, you're definitely, water is something for you, for sure. Water is something.
yeah, no, for sure. And the Root restaurant was next to the lake, a lake, and we'd had this ice hole there. And I guess something I hadn't said was that this delve into colder and colder water had sort of descended into ice swimming. And during COVID, when people had been coming out of the city, they came out a lot to use the ice hole because it was this outdoors activity that you could do and healthy. And Wim Hof and people like that became famous during COVID.
Yeah.
And this ice hole that we'd had at Root had been, like, I expected maybe a couple of people to use it, but like thousands came and used this ice hole that we had at Root, and it became one of the reasons why we got so much press, and like part of this whole holistic sort of package for why it became so popular. The ice hole was a big part of it, so this was another example of that. How there was something that was connecting me to the water, and a friend of mine came and washed in the river. Maybe on the first day I was open. I was like, yeah, I could wash in the river. So I started running every morning and washing in the river. And for like maybe 2 months in the summer, I didn't have a shower, just washing in the river. Sounds like a strange thing to say, but like I was perfectly clean. And I said to my wife, was like, "Am I smelling normal at some point?" She's like, "Yeah, you're absolutely fine." And
I mean, it's
so began
extremely
this
fresh
idea.
water, right? It's like probably better than shower water, right?
Yeah, the water comes down from the mountains, and there's villages and towns along the way, but there isn't much, other than when it's raining, there isn't much overflow from the sewers and things. So yeah, it's super clean. And some friends of mine, the guy who had the boat and some other people had been speaking about whether we could set up some sort of swimming community in the city, because this ice community that I'd had out in the countryside had been so popular. And so we started to think about this, creating this thing that became now Umeå Kallbad, so like Umeå cold bathing. And after that summer, when I was trying to think about what I was going to do next, we launched these Sunday dips. So we basically just invited people to come and swim on a Sunday and put posters up around the city and spammed everybody's Facebook that we knew. And then
I
that first week,
saw
maybe
some of
25.
that on LinkedIn, right? Because you were getting a lot of
Yeah,
attention around that, the Sunday dips, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, because I'd spent those years in PR, I had this sort of toolkit in my arsenal.
Yeah.
And we went, it was 25 came the first week, and then 50 the next, and then and then it went to 80 the week after that. And then we were on we got onto Swedish national TV, like this, like Sunday night, 6 o'clock, BBC One show. And they said it was like this tradition in Umeå. We'd been going 3 weeks. We didn't argue with it, of course. And it just kind of took off. And this community is now, we've got a couple of hundred members. We've got planning permission to put a sauna on an island in the middle of the city. And it's become this beautiful thing. But this, like, it hasn't, I do it. It's called Ideal. I do it for free. I don't get paid out of it. It's a non-profit. But at the same time, I've been thinking about how can I create a new travel business that is regenerative, that isn't about like extracting from these natural resources. And I had these ideas about how you might be able to take a couple of tourists to like a local honey producer, and like their experience being helping that honey producer do what he or she does. Or there's a lady in our village who makes apple juice, but she really struggles to find people to do the picking of the apples and like the washing and the crushing. So what about if the tourists could come and do the picking and the washing and the crushing, and they pay for it as part of an apple in a day product or something? Mm. And one morning I was at the Sunday dips explaining this idea to this biologist who worked for this thing, Rewilding Sweden. I was like, yeah, I heard about Rewilding Sweden. And I told him this story that I had for regenerative travel, and he knew my background because his partner had worked at Root with us, and he was like, you're what we're looking for. And so I went and met with Rewilding, and Rewilding mainly, or like traditionally, people's perspective of rewilding is about this ecological restoration. So how can rewilding is about putting in place a missing piece from a system and then standing back and letting nature do its thing. So in Yellowstone, one of the most famous ones was they put a pack of wolves back into Yellowstone, and it completely changed the landscape.
Yeah, and
it enabled the beavers the beaver colony to increase, and the beavers changed the course of the river, and so on and so forth. But it's like,
it's so interesting
we forget
that you also like you saw the Rewilding Europe thing previously, and you were like, oh no, they wouldn't like that, they wouldn't want me. It just goes to show that like what's meant for you won't miss you, right? Like it came back and got you, which is so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of, and this is one of the challenges with rewilding, because people think it's about getting rid of people. But if you think about what pieces of the ecosystem are missing, quite a lot of the time, there's large herbivores that might be missing, or large carnivores that humans have taken out. But quite often it's this sort of human that's missing from this equation, that we forget that we are part of nature. And so within Rewilding, it had been going for a couple of years. Rewilding Sweden, they were trying to find someone to lead this work around nature for people. How can we bring people in touch with nature again? And the idea that what we did with the swimming community is we take people into the river. Well, as soon as you take someone into the river, they become interested about what lives within the river. So it's a sort of gateway. Swimming becomes a gateway to nature restoration to a certain extent. I went to meet them just out of curiosity, and maybe I thought they might help me with this regenerative travel business, and ended up offering me a job.
Yeah.
That is where I am today.
Wow.
And so part of the work is about enabling people to sort of come into contact with the river and the life within it. And the ecological work we do is about river restoration and forest restoration. But mainly for me, it's about how can we find ways for people to sort of be themselves, to people to not be this sort of grenade throwing robots in cities, to actually connect with something greater themselves. And there's so many things within that. And I've been wondering recently, what is the human version of rewilding? Because if, for example, if you're rewilding a river, then what do you need to do? You need to create the environment for the trout to be able to migrate and take dams out of the way so that they can get to the sea. give them the sort of spawning beds or put the rocks back into place that have been taken out because of timber floating. What is it that we're missing? What is it that humans are missing? And I thought a lot about this, and I wonder whether it's, and I went down this road of thinking maybe we're just this super complex species, and maybe there is no one thing. Maybe it isn't as simple as that, but maybe it is like super simple. And so where I'm at the minute is I wonder whether it's just about helping people find or encouraging people to turn left instead of turn right when you always turn left.
I think that
Thing.
You're such a good example. Like your whole story completely embodies this point that you're touching on of like it's like trusting your intuition, coming back to yourself and like layer by layer by layer peeling back like all the stuff that's been put on you over the years, and it's like reconnecting with who you really are and what makes you really really light up. And every time that you listened to the urges in your soul or your spirit sort of directing you, every time you listened to it, something amazing happened. And when you ignored it, bad things happened. Or your spirit was snuffed, right? And it's also something that I see with people a lot is the more on track we get with who we are and what we want and like living the way that's authentic to us, the things that we used to numb ourselves with become less and less interesting. So like, as you said, your sort of recreational drugs and like heavy drinking and smoking, that came off, but then it was like became a bit of like workaholism and other kind of stuff. And each layer that you peel back, you're getting closer and closer to yourself. And like, could you even imagine now having like 40 cigarettes and like 21 bottles of wine? Ugh. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's in the same way of like with rewilding. It's like you're doing it to yourself. It's just allowing yourself to be your actual natural state instead of all the other stuff that's been put on you.
And of course, it's worth saying that it's easy to say that take left rather than right, or pick up that food item instead of that food item, or change habits. And of course, there are so many things. There's no sort of quick pill. There are so many things that we need that sort of happen along the way. But I do think it's as simple as the sort of trout beds, so that you put the conditions. The conditions are created, and then nature does its thing. Like I went swimming, and then nature did its thing. Do you know what I mean? It took 8 years to kind of get from that point to here. But there's something in there. What you said reminded me of. There was a thing on Netflix. I think it was called My Octopus Teacher.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if I saw it, but I read his book, and in his book, he talks about tracking, and specifically tracking joy. And that was something that I really looked at about that summer when we opened that coffee shack. I just read that book, and I went on a tracking course separately. I've been on a tracking course, and tracking is this wonderful thing where like an expert tracker can track a species over rock. It's not just about the footprints that you see. There's this connection that you can make if you're able to sort of stop for long enough, if you're able to sort of feel into these senses that we have for long enough. And this is this thing around this, like dropping, if you're able to drop the expectations or the predictions, all of a sudden we activate our senses. And like we've all had it where we've like felt someone behind us, or like we felt something in the room, or like even if I walked behind you now, you'd feel me behind you, even without seeing me or hearing me. We've got these like wonderful sets of senses, and there's lots and lots of them, that when we're able to sort of tap into it, like slow down enough, that something sort of comes alive. And that summer I really sort of pulled at these threads of joy. And and I guess one of the reasons why I then followed this sort of swimming route, which took me to where I was because there was something that, I don't know, there's something that, why does it keep coming back? Why does the water keep coming back? And I really sort of pulled at this thread of joy. And I think that's something sort of key within all of this, is this pursuing joy and allowing yourself, not like allowing yourself these sort of circuit breakers to snap out of sort of, I don't know, negative thinking or locked into the same thinking patterns or expecting, doing things the same way and expecting a different outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you also touched previously, and I just want to say like a tiny bit on the psychedelics. And I just want to say, like, from a healing perspective, what you just said is one of the reasons why psychedelics in like psychotherapy are becoming so popular, because what they do is they create such a strong feeling physiologically, like in your body and in your mind, that they literally open a new neural pathway so that you're able to start using a different part of your brain that has been previously kind of closed or just like hadn't been opened yet. So what can take years in talking therapy, in like 1 or 2 sessions with psychedelics under supervision, right, in the right conditions, can literally just it actually opens your mind, and then you see things differently. So yeah, again, nature is healing in every way.
Yeah, fungi is just a magical creature in general. And the thing
Yeah.
about psychedelics, I guess, it's important to say, is that when I was in my early 20s and I was sort of participating in recreational drugs, it was very much to escape something. It was a party thing. But the two times that I had psychedelic journeys, as part of what I explained before, it was very much moving towards something, and it was very much, whilst it wasn't in a clinical setting, it was in a very safe setting, and it wasn't like mixed with other things. It was not like a party. It wasn't, drinking wasn't involved. It was 3 people, both times, like moving towards something. And it wasn't like when I came out of the first time, and again the second time, it wasn't like I was craving the narcotic ever again. I don't suppose I will do it again. I might do it, but I don't have a sort of urge or urges towards it. Because what it was is it just, I guess how I describe it is, in the same way that meditation or silence sort of creep open a doorway to something, some sort of sense of feeling. That psychedelics like smashes the door down to a certain extent, but it's the same sort of, it's on the same medium for me, the feeling that I get if I get into a real like deep meditative state, or like when I did the 10-day Vipassana on days 8, 9 and 10. And Vipassana, if you don't know, is this 10 days of meditation where you sit there and you meditate for 10 hours a day for 10 days, and you don't speak to anyone or make any eye contact. All you do is just meditate, sleep and eat. And like you can imagine sitting down for 10 hours cross-legged, like it's fucking painful, like it's just immensely painful, and like doing nothing other than being in your thoughts for 10 days is like torturous. And so for days I cried, and all this sort of traumas come up. But eventually on it, what I was trying to say is that days 8, 9 and 10 I got to this point of like full body dissolution. Like I could, if someone coughed across the room, I felt it come across me. And that's the same, that in fact was further along than the place that the psychedelics took me. So it wasn't as if, at some point I realized that I didn't need the narcotic. We have it all within us.
Yeah.
But you are right, I do think that psychedelics can sort of be the vehicle to help people get to where, to like break.
Yeah, I don't think it's like the be all end all, but I think it can be a really good like kickstart to like a therapeutic journey, or like it can really help people break through some pretty big blocks. Like I've seen some incredible results with it. It's pretty amazing. So, yeah.
Have you had psychedelic assisted therapy?
Not I have had an ayahuasca experience with trained professionals, so I suppose you could say that that was yes,
Yeah,
yes,
similar.
yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I'd like to have that podcast. That sounds like
Yeah,
something
well, we can always
want
have a
to explore.
follow-up for sure. Um, wow, okay, so your journey, like literally that whole journey is just such a good example of evolution, tapping into your intuition, really knowing against all odds, societal, familial, everything, like what is right for you and what is true for you. And I think that that takes so much strength, and so many people ignore that in themselves. So I think that your chosen life path, it just reflects all of the wonderful things that happen when you trust your intuition and you, as you said, follow your joy, which I think everyone should just do more of that, like follow their joy, trust their intuition. When something isn't right, you feel it, you know it in your body. And you might not know where you're supposed to go, but it's like baby steps, following each little cue from the universe.
Mm.
I like to ask people what their biggest rock bottom moments were on their journey. You definitely touched on a few. Um, is there one in particular in there that really like changed the trajectory of everything for you?
Yeah, that trip to Dublin is
Mm,
definitely where it all. And there was loads of things that were happening around that. That was the bottom, I think, and it has been, whilst it has been, of course, as life is, ups and downs ever since. It has been an upwards trajectory since then. Um, yeah.
yeah. What
Mm.
with that in mind and looking at where you are now, thinking back to the guy that you were in Dublin, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, Dublin Dan from Sweden Dan, what would you say? What advice? What would you tell him?
I would give him a hug first,
Hmm.
and if I tried to hug him, he would like feel really like he would feel really uncomfortable. I couldn't hug people back then, and I'd hold on to him and I'd keep hugging him. I'd keep hugging him until he was until I felt his shoulders drop. Then I'd probably squeeze him on the bum so that he laughed. Um,
Oh.
but yeah, I don't think I would. I think I would just. I don't know. I don't know if I'd say anything. I think I'd just hug him and like look him in the eyes and tell him it's going to be all right.
Yeah.
I've had a bunch of therapists over the years, but one of them always says, like, nearly every time I meet with him, it's like, Dan, it's going to be like, just like you're on the process. Like, what you're doing is going to take you wherever it takes you. Like, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. Whatever it is, it's going to be all right. Like, I really
Yeah.
think that now. I really feel that whatever the outcome, one way or the other, um, it's going to be all right. Like, it's about how you sort of. Yeah, I think you should get to the point where you feel like whatever's going to happen, you trust your ability to deal with it, engage with it, and like make decisions around it. Um,
That's such a good example of just like, that's like a good encapsulation of what inner child work is. It's like getting to the point where you are the person that you once needed, to like show up for you. And you get to a point of inner strength and inner trust, and you know that you are resourced enough and you've got you, and like you can handle whatever life throws at you. And that's kind of like, especially going back and hugging the older version of you, that's such a perfect example of what inner child work is. So, and you
hmm.
came to that all on your own.
Just a couple of things came up while you were speaking. Is that there's a couple of tools that were really like pivotal. I think like movement was definitely one of them. Like finding a
Yeah.
way to become healthier and like and look at the way I existed. I guess to think about what I ate and what I fed myself with, not just in terms of food, but generally the things I consumed. I think was relevant. Another thing was that there's a book called I think The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. And
Mm-hmm.
she in that talks about this thing called daily pages.
Yeah.
And when we went to Vietnam, I had journaled on and off. Like I wasn't a daily journaler. I was just, it would come for a bit, and then it never sort of stuck, diarization. But when we went to Vietnam, I was trying to break my addiction to my phone. Like I really felt about my phone the same as I felt about cigarettes.
Yeah.
And whilst I want to use technology, I definitely don't want to be a Luddite. I wanted to find a relationship to it where it didn't control me, that I didn't have to pull it out whenever I was in a queue or whenever I sat on a toilet or any sort of spare moment or like going between doing one thing and the next. And so when we went to Vietnam, I bought a book like this little thing and put my phone in my suitcase. And for the first sort of week or something, didn't use my phone. And whenever I thought about the phone, I took my pen out instead and wrote down wrote down the experience of. And I would be writing, oh, why do you torment me so, and things like this, and why do I want to pull it out? What am I going to look at? And then eventually I started to give myself like feeding windows, and so that I would use the phone at like whatever it was, like midday, and then at 5 o'clock or something. And I would write down when I had that urge to look up who was the patron saint of Liverpool, as like these strange things that we think we need to look up instantly. I would write it in my diary, or write it in my thing that lived in my pocket. And when it got to my feeding windows, then I'd have a list of things that I thought I wanted to look at. And like by the time you've wedged this sort of space in between the sort of stimulus and the time when you're going to respond, like all of a sudden of that list, very rarely was there many things on that list that I actually wanted to put my time into looking up on the phone. So things started to change, and and there's a whole different story about like the journey with the phone. But with the book, not only did it sort of help me sort of release this addiction with my phone, and now I probably have, I don't know, half an hour screen time a day max, and it feels very different. Like previously, I had to sort of hide it behind the laptop, whereas so I couldn't see it. You know what I mean? Like a pack of sweets.
Yeah.
But the book, more than anything, and I think I've been through 50 now, always lives in my pocket, and it's helped me be able to express my feelings.
Yeah.
Being able to write it down has really sort of helped me being able to explore something and like wedge that, put that wedge in between stimulus and response so that I can choose how I'm going to respond to something, so that it's in the right set or setting, which is like particularly relevant when it comes to work. Like there's no way I could have done this work that I do now like 7 or 8 years ago. Like I just wouldn't have had the sort of patience and the sort of self-control or self-restraint to be able to engage with these sort of challenging conversations in the way that I do today.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There's
I could
actually
say during
from a neuroscience perspective, like so many studies have been done when you actually write with pen or pencil onto paper, and parts of your brain light up and are activated that are not activated when you're doing the same sort of responding to a question or writing something down on your phone. Like that part of your brain does not get engaged, and it does when you write. When I started training to be a therapist, which was right around when you guys left London, the one of our first assignments was that we had to start a journaling practice. So I now have also been journaling for like 7 or 8 years, and it's a transformative practice. And I tell people, if you can't afford therapy, buy a journal. Every time you're upset, you're hurt, like you feel a trigger, like something's activated you, write it down, write it down, write it down. And things lose their emotional charge, and you're able to work through them kind of on your own. And it's really powerful. If I go back to like my first journal, like the stuff that I was hung up on, it's just wild, like the evolution. And being able to
yeah,
go back is
yeah.
it's really helpful. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dan. That was like, yeah, all the tools and your experiences is going to be so inspiring for people and expansive and helpful for anyone who's feeling lost or stuck or isn't, needs to figure out what their next step is. Like, you know, just follow the breadcrumbs. And I think your story is amazing. So thank you so much for sharing. If people want to get in touch with you, if they want to work with you, if they want to just talk to you about your experiences, where is the best place for them to find you? Or do you not want them to find you? That's also a choice.
Yeah, I don't. I guess I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. And I really look forward to seeing where things continue to go for you, because it's just from beginning to present has just been amazing. So thank you for
Thanks.
sharing.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Doc.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Career Congregation. I hope it gave you something to think about or inspired you in some way. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone you think it might resonate with. Every bit of support helps. If you know someone who you think would make a great guest, please send them my way via the link in the show bio. And if you'd like to support the show and the work that I do, you can buy me a coffee via the coffee link also in the show bio. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week for another conversation about all things career.